Well, I'd like to welcome all of our registrants and attendees today to our April version of the Oregon City Business Alliance Zoom webinar. We are making progress. I see where the CDC has now announced that if you are fully vaccinated, you can go outside and not wear a mask as long as you're with other people that are vaccinated and not in large group. So to me, at least we're going forward and not backwards. And let's hope that our governor does not place Clackamas County in another higher risk category this week. Well, I am just excited about today's topic and today's group of speakers. I was sharing with them before we got started a newspaper article. The headline basically says, Rivers developer and city working on details. This headline was dated April 13th, 2011. We are now approximately 1 decade later. And so I just wanted to share with everyone that's watching today the opportunity to work with a sophisticated and experienced team of experts doesn't come along every day. And the landfill, the Rossman landfill, is a complicated project, but it's not something that cannot be dealt with and capitalized on for tremendous economic opportunity, not only for our local community, but for our region. The landfill and around it has been identified by Metro as a regional center by Cruz Way. As such, it's been mandated to be a commercial, retail, office, medical community, but it's sat dormant for a number of reasons. And we have the opportunity today to possibly now break ground and move forward in a new beginning. Recently, if you remember, we did a webinar on the North End redevelopment opportunities. Since then, Corner 14 is open to a vibrant success with their food carts and the microbrew. We have a hotel complex proposed and planned to start construction soon across from the end of the Oregon Trail. We have the possible modification of the transfer station, which is a large piece of ground on 205 and 213. We also, I'm aware of a new development application has been submitted 2 weeks ago for phase 2 of the Cove. But the hub, the real hub of all that economic activity is the Rossman landfill. So today I'm honored to have the Summit Development Group provide a PowerPoint presentation on their vision. It increases property taxes by over $3 million, workforce jobs, deals with the continual leaching and contamination of the landfill, and its time has come. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce the president of the Summit Development Group, Seth Henderson, to go ahead and introduce his team and begin your presentation. Thank you, Seth.
Yeah, Ken, thank you very much for the introduction. Greg, did you want to pull up the presentation? Perfect. So first off, I'd like to thank the Oregon City Business Alliance and obviously all the participants currently online for your time this morning and willingness to learn more about our proposed development plan for the brownfield parcel of the former Rossman landfill. My name's Seth Henderson, and I'm the president of Summit Development Group, who is the master developer for this endeavor. If you happen to participate in or have seen the Citizens Involvement Committee presentation or our presentation to Metro or our presentation to one of the other boards, some of the information that we're going to present today will be repetitive, though we have made substantial progress over the last couple of months. So we're really going to focus on that. Before we dive into the review of the design, I would like to spend a few minutes covering the agenda for our presentation and giving some quick background on who we are and what we've accomplished to date on this pursuit. So, introduction of team. Once I go through kind of this introduction, I'll be passing it off to John Faulkner from Summit, who's going to introduce the rest of the project team. Greg Mitchell of LRS is going to cover our master plan and the program that we've put together to date and what went in our application last month. Kurt Lango is going to handle landscaping. Brad Kilby of HHPR is going to handle civil. Eric Orenson of Orenson Environmental is going to talk about some of the environmental improvements that we're proposing for the site. Phil Worth of Kittleson is going to handle transportation and what studies we've done to date along with the city to assess that. And then we'll have a Q&A period. Next slide, please. So who is Summit Development Group? So I would typically define our firm as a local, sophisticated boutique development firm located in the Tiger Triangle. We have 8 full-time employees, the majority of which live within 15 minutes of this particular site. Collectively, we have over a century of experience in design, construction, and development, creating over $1 billion in asset value across millions of gross square feet of asset. On this slide, you'll see kind of the current developments that we have in process. So Brookside Apartments, that's 104 units, garden style out in Gresham. We should be getting TCO next month on that project. 808 on Alder, that's a biotech building, Southeast Portland. That was existing historic building being renovated. That also should be getting warm shell completion next month. Block 3 in Vancouver, so that's the Vancouver waterfront. That's a full block project, 226 units, retail on the first floor, so mixed use. We're scheduled to break ground on that next month. So next month is a pretty big month for us across the board. 503 on 10th, that is biotech. Again, that is Southeast Portland. Right now, we're in the design phase of that one, and then obviously the north end. And we would state that we're currently in the entitlement process for that project. What is our typical approach to development? So I've been asked a few times recently, what is our vision for the site? What is important to note is that the city has already created the framework for that vision, and that is the zoning code. So we are in the MUD designation, or mixed use downtown zoning, which identifies what uses are permitted, which uses are prohibited, what is the allowable heights of the buildings, what are the allowable sizes of the buildings, what is the required design of the infrastructure, etc. So we'll get into this more during the design portion of the discussion today. But the vision of the site is essentially a balance of the zoning code, community input, and what we can financially underwrite so we can bring this to existence in today's economic reality. Early on, we did sit down with city staff and we kind of discussed a partnership approach to this endeavor, understanding full well that other developers have tried and been unsuccessful to develop the site. We spent a number of hours going through boxes in a city hall conference room, just assessing what public documents were available regarding those pursuits and what feedback from the feedback that was received, what was received well and what could have been done better, and have tried to take that input and incorporate it into our general development plan. So in addition to that, our teams reached out to, I believe we're up to about 60 leaders within the community and asked for their opinion on what do you see the vision of this site being. A couple examples of feedback that we've received. Housing. So some of the previous development plans that were proposed were very retail heavy. And when we looked at the zoning for this property, mixed use downtown, a downtown has housing. You want to bring those people so that live, work, play, typically those are the designations discussed, are all in the same location. So we heard that there was a need in the community for additional housing, and it made sense based on what is allowable underneath the zoning code. And so we've added a significant magnitude. We're over 500 units currently proposed for this site. It would be disingenuous for us to propose a project upon which we couldn't execute. And multifamily is an important component of a lot of funds assets right now. Multifamily long-term has performed very well as an asset. So having that as part of the design also makes it easier for us to get equity and debt, and therefore actually bring this project to reality. We also heard a grocer was important. So we can't force a tenant to sign a lease, but what we've done in our general development plan is we've looked at kind of the different standard sizes of grocers. So you've got a small scale, which would be Green Zebra or Trader Joe's, kind of mid-range New Season Zupans, larger format, Safeway, Fred Meyer. We've looked at potentially where would those go on site, where would the parking be, how would it interact with the other buildings. We are out actively pursuing a grocer. And again, baked into our overall master plan is the option to have any one of those types of sizes of tenants as a grocer on our site. More recently, we've actually heard that indoor entertainment as well as childcare should be a focus of our development. So we're just right now, I mean, those are comments that we've received in the last month. So we're now in the process of kind of exploring the feasibility of those particular uses. So what's important to note, this dialogue and process is continuous throughout the entitlement phase. And today is another step in that program development. What have we achieved to date? So whether or not you're aware, we have actually been working on this project now for 1.5 years. So we've been in negotiations with the DEQ, or the Department of Environmental Quality, for more than 1 year. And we're currently finalizing the agreements, which will address future liability, maintenance, and management of the site for the next 30 years. And that will be our responsibility. Obviously, based on people participating today, we've assembled our project team, and that team's worked through 2 pre-app meetings with the city. We've incorporated their initial comments and concerns, and we've submitted our general development plan application, which went in March 30th. So we're currently in our 30-day completeness review, and we're hoping to get some indication this week of how we did. How did that application go over with city staff? Is it complete? So in regards to the general development plan, this does involve a public process. So you will hear about this summer, probably early fall, the opportunity to participate in these public meetings. And also, it's important to note that where we're setting up the framework with this general development plan, each individual parcel on site, so we will subdivide this into a number of parcels, probably north of 20 parcels. Each one of those parcels has to go through a detailed development plan. So we have to show that we are complying with the zoning code and we're complying with our general development plan. So the GDP is really the overall framework for the future development of each parcel. I'm always bemused when a developer stands in front of a group such as today and says this project is or will be because of them specifically. It's the developer's role, Summit's role, to work with the community and the municipality in which this project sits to create the vision. It's a collective vision. It is not our vision. And it's to assemble the most qualified team possible and lead that team. But the majority of the heavy lift and what determines the quality of this development is really the project team that's put together. It's not just the developer. And I'm really excited about the collective of outstanding local firms that we've put together, and not just the firms, but the individuals staffed from each one of those firms that's been assigned to this project. And so now I'd like to introduce John Faulkner, our VP of Design and Development, and he's going to introduce the overall project design and engineering team. Thank you again, John.
Great, thank you, Seth, so much. And good morning, OCBA Board of Directors and members of the community. Well, as most of you already know, this is a very challenging site, but it still has the ability that we believe to yield great opportunities for the community. As Seth previously stated, it is a former landfill site, or more commonly referred to as a brownfield site in our industry. The site also has geological and natural resource overlays, as well as other areas that are identified within the 100-year floodplain. You put all those pieces together and you start to understand the magnitude and the complexities of some of the challenges that we are addressing today. Personally, prior to joining Summit Development Group, I spent many years of my career in the Bay Area, and I had the unique opportunity and experience to work on the 300-acre brownfield redevelopment site, more commonly known today as Mission Bay in San Francisco. Once a former industrial rail yard, it is now a vibrant, high-density, transit-oriented community filled with housing, retail, office, life sciences, educational, medical, and entertainment uses. So with that type of knowledge and experience, we know what it takes to assemble a skilled team of design and engineering partners to create a successful development, but also brings value and enriches the community experience. We believe we have assembled an outstanding design team from some of the Portland's top firms, many who have previously not only assessed this site, but are also knowledgeable about it from prior involvement in multiple pursuits. They are fully committed to the site, to this community, and to the economic, environmental benefits associated with this shared vision for the North End project. Next slide, please, Greg. Our architect for the project is Greg Mitchell with LRS Architects. With over 35 years of experience in a broad variety of project types, he is known for his collaborative approach to design, his strong project management skills, his design vision, and clear communication. Most recently, Greg completed the design for the Vancouver waterfront Grant Street Pier project, as well as the New Seasons Market in Woodstock neighborhood. Currently, his 290 mixed-use development project, featuring robust retail surrounding a public square located in the central core of the Conway Master Plan, will be breaking ground soon. The North End project will benefit from his vast experience of creating meaningful places for people to enjoy. Our landscape architect for the project is Kurt Lango with Lango Hansen Architects. Kurt is a founding partner and lead accredited professional. He has over 30 years of experience in public facilitation, planning, and interpretive and design processes. Having worked extensively with both public and private partnerships and multidisciplinary teams, he brings outstanding design and management skills to complex projects. Also, Kurt brings extensive multi-use and open space experience to our North End project development team, having worked over the last decade in Portland's Conway district, completed numerous parks for the city of Oregon City. Kurt strongly believes in the power of landscapes to strengthen a place's identity, but also to engage residents and visitors' sense of community. Land use planning and civil engineering for our project is provided by Harper Hoff, Peterson, and Regalius. The firm is being represented today by Brad Kilby, a planning manager out of their Portland office. Brad has over 24 years of public and private planning experience in Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and internationally in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Brad considers himself a generalist with a strong interest in the built environment and systems thinking. His most recent achievements include permitting for the new Sherwood High School in Sherwood, Oregon, and expansion of the Salem Health Hospital in Salem, Oregon. Over the course of his career, Brad has worked on similar mixed-use development projects within the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan area, including both the Portland and Vancouver waterfronts. Our environmental engineer for the project today is Eric Arnson of Arnson Environmental. Eric has over 22 years of experience in environmental consulting with a background in engineering, geology, and hydrogeology. Eric founded Arnson Environmental in 2016 to focus on local clients and projects that have tangible benefits to our community. His career is focused on environmental investigations and compliance at contaminated landfill properties, with areas of focus that include groundwater modeling, site remediation, and facilitating redevelopment of environmentally impacted properties. Eric loves complex collaborative projects, and he brings his extensive site-specific experience to the North End project, having worked on the Rossman landfill project in various capacities since 2003. And finally, last but not least, our transportation engineer for the project is Phil Worth of Kittleson and Associates. Phil's worked on a wide range of development projects throughout the country, including a number of large-scale mixed-use development projects in Alaska, Florida, Pennsylvania, and California. Regionally, Phil's worked on major development projects such as Bridgeport Village in Tigard, Aranco Station, Amber Glen, and Hillsboro, the Conway Master Plan in Northwest Portland, and several blocks of the Pearl District. Locally, Phil is a graduate of Oregon City High School and professionally has prepared and updated the city's transportation system plan. He has completed several sub-area plans and has prepared master plans for Clackamas Community College, Willamette Falls Hospital, and the Red Soils campus of Clackamas County. So with all that, I would now like to introduce to you all Greg Mitchell, Associate Principal for LRS Architects, to present the latest development of our master plan and programming for the North End project. Greg.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to talk about the North End project with all you today. And some of you, I think some of these exhibits will look very familiar to you. Some of you, they'll be totally new. And there's some really exciting stuff going on in some of the imagery that we're going to share with you today. I just want to go briefly over just for the sake of orientation for everyone, and you're going to see the exhibits from here forward kind of oriented all the same way, so that just helps us track through this discussion. Again, the Rossman landfill, aka now the North End, is sited here at the northern extent of the downtown. The downtown is modeled here. You can see the proximity of the two, one to the other, and the connection of the 205 and the 213, the kind of the zenith crossing here. And again, of course, the Willamette River and the confluence of the Clackamas and the Cove project to the northwest of the site. Another key factor of the site is its proximity to the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, which we'll be talking a lot about. And real issue here is making sure that we stay and we honor the NROD and we do not encroach upon this wonderful little wetland area here off to the east of the site. So again, the orientation, most of the exhibits will be maintained through this presentation so that we keep everything oriented correctly. Just to reinforce and basically echo what Seth had talked about, is that this site is wholly within the mixed use development. And again, that the zoning code was really clear in setting up excellent guidelines for us to create this master plan. The other aspect of this was a really strong outreach program. We really like the feedback that we've gotten thus far on the project, and helped guide our design team to understand and define what is really important in this plan moving forward. The other aspect of this is we are proposing things that we come to understand, and also was codified in your code, is that we're proposing all uses on this site that are fully conforming, either conforming uses outright or through conditional use process, and only asking for one modification, which I think we can touch on in the Q&A later with the site, which is pretty exceptional when you think about how large the site is and how complex the site is in total. We'll zoom in a little bit here and talk more about the site and the bounding edges of the site. Again, up to the north of the project is the existing Home Depot. You see the current Trails Inn Golf Center that is resident on the site. The all important end of the Trail Interpretive Center off here to the southwest. We also note that we talk about multimodal. There's opportunities here. The Oregon train station is located directly across Washington Street to the site. Again, to orient you, Washington Street borders the site to the northwest. Abernathy borders the site to the south. And again, what we call this edge is actually our no build zone, or our limit of development to the NROD and this existing wetland, which we need to stay well out of and not impact adversely. So we'll pause here for a moment. We're going to talk about things that are challenging to the site, impacts to the site. What you see on the screen in front of you right now is two illustratives. This is specific to the floodplain impacts, and they're significant. You see in the blue designation of the diagram is the current 100-year floodplain described on the site. And you can see how this is a significant impact to how we would develop this site. What you see on the right is an illustrative of how we're going to mitigate the flood impacts, and basically we're trying to get to a net zero impact with regards to the floodplain as prescribed by FEMA and other standards. You could also understand the challenges that we have to take care of 100% of this on our site. There's no ability to remediate elsewhere on adjacent properties. This all has to be handled by this development. So what you see is in red is those areas of encroachment where we're going to basically impact the floodplain. You also see an area in orange here, and that's the percentage impact to the site. And the area in blue is where we're going to add more flood capacity to help balance or net zero the flood impacts. These areas currently, as we get into other exhibits, are designed as parking fields. So those parking fields could go into flood on the 100-year flood event, not adversely impact, again, the flood capacity, but equally as importantly, is not going to be jeopardizing any structures of people within those structures that are going to be wholly out of the floodplain. In addition to the floodplain impacts, there's several other things, and we'll go into deeper detail on most, but it's a fill site. We understand that there is a cap, a structured cap over this fill site. We've gone through extensive studies during our grading program to regrade this site to realize the master plan that we're going to present to you is that we're going to minimize any impact into the cap and keep buildings and structures out of the cap and out of that trash field below that cap. It's no easy task. Additionally, you'll see that based on existing conditions, everyone that's familiar with the site, there's artificial topography that's been created by the landfill. What that triggers is basically a steep slope hazard. So we have to remediate that steep slope hazard through this design process and through this engineering process. What does that mean? That means we're in a seismically activated zone. These are unconsolidated fill material. Therefore, we have to restrain this. So there has to be structures that have to be built during the development of the site to help restrain those the seismic activity and maintain those slopes, maintain the structural integrity of the site. Additionally, structures on the site will have what we call deep foundations. So basically all those foundations have to go down to a bearing so that during a seismic event, we don't have differential settlement and other hazards that occur. One more thing, degasification. Again, we'll talk more about that later, but landfills emanate methane and other gases. Those have to be remediated. They have to be remediated with the design of this master plan and structures that go on it. This team has done a lot of that. I personally have worked on several projects with that. Basically what that means is there's a ventilation system underneath all the buildings and structures to help to mitigate and migrate those gases away from occupied space. Now we'll work into the actual master plan. We'll talk in more detail about the master plan. So again, just to reiterate yourself, we have Washington Street, Abernathy, same orientation. What you see here is, this is a very large site. It's 62 acres. In going through the master plan and developing the concept behind this, we started to define what we call districts. And so we can refer to things in districts and we can have dialogue of each one of the districts. But basically, the North District is our most concentrated use district. This is the most densified part of the site, currently slated for the mixed use housing projects and entertainment, retail, entertainment, restaurants, both dine-in and casual dining, a whole plethora and range of uses within that very, what we call very urban setting. Then moving to the east, we have what they call the East District. This is anchored by retail, commercial anchor uses. Additional buildings located here So it'll be a full range of services based on those. Central District, this is an interesting one. This is what I call a hybrid. You have the ability to have larger, mid to larger anchor retail conjoined with what we call liner shops, or shops in the area of like maybe 1,000 square feet, 2,000, smaller type of shops. And those orient actually to Abernathy to help activate this edge along this street frontage to Abernathy. Moving to the South District, conversely to the Central District, we have a similar situation, but we've reversed this. We envision this as an anchor retail or pair facing again Abernathy to help activate this edge, but we put the liner shops along this edge to help activate the streets that they front here. And as Seth had touched on, is the ability to have a possible grocer in anchor here at the terminus. Now, again, we've got a full range of spaces, building scales, and the ability of infrastructure, parking, key important to retail. And we've done a very, very detailed analysis to make sure that we have a balance of all those things, that we have the range of spaces, the ability to park, the ability for people to arrive either vehicular or pedestrian or bike. And we'll get into that discussion in a little bit more detail. In each one of these areas. So we make sure that within each one of these districts, we balance all those things together so that collectively, it's almost a symbiotic relationship, one to the other. They all work in a balanced harmony, that the parking works, the pedestrian access works, the vehicular access is clean and is very well defined. So here's an illustrative that shows some of what we call kind of a massing, but like one more than that. What you're looking is actually directly to the south. You're kind of hovering over the cove. In the forefront, you see the Washington Street frontage. You see this actually peninsula piece, that's that nose of that North District that we were just talking about. This is the continuation connection. This is actually Home Depot is off to the left. This road extension comes into what we call Market Street. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more, but creating this downtown city street edge coming all the way through the site. Our anchor retail here to the east, the smaller uses here that you saw in the diagram prior, this hybrid building here with liner shops on the south side. Abernathy is behind those buildings, kind of down slope, and active pretty much throughout this project. You'll see active frontages along these street systems that we've created. So now we're going to talk about kind of the diagram, the building blocks, and the all important, we call it the framework plan of what really holds this project together and allows flexibility during the development of the future phases of the project. So what you see in red on the left-hand side of the screen is vehicular patterns. Specifically in this area here, you see a red zone. We're envisioning a structured parking below mixed-use housing and retail located on top of that. Again, recall back to what we talked about at the beginning. We're using this parking structure actually as flood relief. So that's basically parking only, non-occupied space. So we're allowed to allow that to flood in a 100-year floodplain. So we're taking real advantage of that. Another aspect of this, remember what I talked about the steep slope hazards, we're actually going to use this parking structure to actually buttress the top of that slope. There's about a 30-foot vertical grade change between Washington Street and what we call the top of the mesa, or basically the grade datum that we're basing all of these structures off of. One of the big drivers in this is this connection, excuse me. a connection from Washington Street through the site to Abernathy. This is almost the spine, if you will, of this development. It was a key point. We'll talk more about it in greater detail later, but this is a key feature of what really is the glue that holds this whole thing together and how everything basically grows organically out of that. What you see on the right-hand side of the screen is the pedestrian connections through the site. So what you can see is that basically we created a framework of streets that fall directly in line with what the MUD zoning is requesting of us, that we start to develop streets and buildings that front on streets to create active spaces and edges for people to occupy that are clear for wayfinding and reinforce that downtown feel that is in the zoning for the site. You see here that there are some yellow dots. Those are connections. We see those actually as vertical connections, not unlike some of the connections that Oregon City has now, like your elevator, for instance. We have, again, a 30-foot vertical elevation change between Washington Street and this upper area. We envision that there would be these public access points at Washington Street along this pedestrian access way. So you would have a combination of elevators and public stairs that would take you up onto this upper elevation. And the buildings are separated by these courtyards or mini plazas. So people come up and arrive into a plaza. The plaza is then interconnected to this very robust pedestrian network. Very important part of this pedestrian network is the connection to the End of the Trail Interpretive Center. Our team has looked at several options on connecting this interpretive center to our pedestrian connections through the site. This particular area here is about 20, to give you guys some idea, it's about 20 to 25 feet of elevation change between this portion of the site and the End of the Trail Interpretive Center. This gives you a much better idea of what basically the topography, the section, and just gives you a really good idea of the massing. This section is through that north district. There's actually, I know that your screens are pretty small, but there's a little key plan up here. You can kind of make out that's the north district here. This section is through that north district. Washington Street is here. That proposed parking structure is here. And we're proposing mixed use housing sitting on top of that podium. You see our first street section here. And we've worked very, very hard with city staff and engineering and transportation to designate what these widths are. So these have already been well vetted with the city on what the widths are and what our design team would really like to see in these street widths as well, because we want to make sure that not only we have enough space for vehicle movements through there, but ample area for pedestrians and ample area for landscape and outside furniture zones. You see at the midpoint of the site, we're proposing, again, a mixed use project, housing on top. You're seeing the idea and possibility of a raised plaza space for residents, retail on each side, facing the streets, an internal parking structure with one level below the parking structure. And again, we've checked this, we vetted this with regards to the depth of the cap underneath this. This is entirely possible. The cap in this area of the site is actually a little bit deeper, so it allows us the luxury of putting in the parking below those types of uses. Moving a little bit further to the east, again, the streetscape, and moving a little bit further, you see part of what we call Market Street. The sections are below that, kind of a plan section. So you see the building, the street, the building, you see these sidewalks, landscape zones, on-street parking, and travel lanes. Here's a detail of the Market Street section. This is the basically the multimodal street section that you have proposed, or a 2-story or a high bay retail, flex space retail commercial buildings. Canopies are envisioned to cover the walkways from sun and rain. You have a landscape zone, a parking zone, a dedicated bike throughway, travel lane, dedicated bike throughway, on-street parking, and again, the edge and the pedestrian sidewalk zone. Here's an illustrative of what that might feel like. This is looking basically to the south, past that first set of buildings. If you can imagine, if you will, the mixed-use housing projects sitting on top of that parking structure on your right-hand side, and the mixed-use housing project is on the left-hand side of the screen. And what the width of that street feels like, what the landscaping feels like, you can see that there's an opportunity for the street widths and the sidewalk widths for outdoor furnishings, so that these retail areas can spill out onto the street. We still have a furniture zone to help designate the pedestrian throughway, to help actually buffer also from the on-street parking. So let's talk a little bit about what the genesis of the plan was. When we started to have the conversations about what's going to really make this, and what is really good about Oregon City, and what do we really want to emulate. And what we thought is we really need to have, we're calling a Market Street. In generic terms, it's a main street, and you have a diversity of uses, and you give the opportunity for a diversity of uses. And what we envision is, we call a lot of like liner shop type uses along a 3-block string of this Market Street. You see that again from Home Depot, the road comes up. Actually, this comes up to grade here. This is pretty much a level streetscape from this point to this point. The illustration to the right is really talking about, the edges of what that street might be, and that, it's all about, the buildings almost become secondary to the edge and the streetscape that is created. So you create this really robust and varied facades and opportunities for rain shelter and then animation of that space through signage. The other aspect of this that's really exciting for us is that, you see some people here dining, and it's in the evening. Well, this is where the symbiotic relationship of housing really comes into play. Is you can envision that, not only are these uses for, the general public, for the people at large, for a regional center, there are also goods and services that support the residents there. And what's really great about that is that helps activate these areas into the evening. And it also puts eyes on the street. You have residents living there. So then public safety is increased as well. That is good vitality. That is good mixed use. That is a good downtown. The next slide just basically gives you another more character pieces of how those edges, how we envision those edges to be activated, how the space feels, how the storefronts feel, the diversity of the storefronts along those street frontages. And with that, I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to our landscape architect, Kurt Lango. Kurt.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. See if you could maybe turn my video on, but there we go. Well, first of all, I'd have to say that as a landscape architect, we're very thrilled to be working on a project that really puts a lot of sensitivity and care into the open space system. What you see on the slide on the left with all the blue dash outlines just show the sheer number of open spaces and pedestrian ways that we have throughout the project. And I'd like to go into just a little bit of detail on some of them, but the images on the right are really just more of kind of character images to show you really at kind of the street level what you may encounter. Different pedestrian spaces that can be illuminated at night that are very friendly and safe to be in. And then the lower slide of with these different establishments really creating this kind of indoor kind of outdoor relationships. Next slide. Just another example of the different types of open spaces that we have is, as Greg was mentioning, we have these pedestrian kind of corridors that will allow people to be able to kind of sit outside of restaurants, to shop, kind of ample seating. And what we really like about these different pedestrian ways is that some of them actually might be covered to provide kind of year-round areas for people to be in, both during the sunny times for shade, but also during inclement weather as well. Next slide. So at the heart of the project and what we see as actually the kind of living room space is a large central plaza and square. And we envision this space as a place for celebrations, events, a place that can accommodate a large number of people, but also provide spaces for kind of smaller gatherings, or if you just simply want to come and have your lunch. A very flexible space. And the way that we envision this and many other kind of public plazas and open spaces associated with this project is, you know, not only is this a place to live, certainly to shop, but also a place to play as well. Next slide. One of the, I think the special places in my heart that we're trying to develop here is what we're calling the vertical park, which is located at the north end of the site. It's that kind of trapezoidal space that you see up there. We have a significant amount of grade change. So from a pedestrian and a street level, it almost becomes this gateway into the development, into the city. But it also provides an opportunity to have a meandering path kind of winding down that space, and perhaps there's some play elements associated with it to truly make it a unique place for the city. And the slide down below shows an example of the pocket parks, and those are those other red squares that you see throughout the project. Particularly nowadays with the pandemic and kind of rethinking our outdoor spaces, we feel it's really important to have a number of these smaller spaces associated with the retail environments. Next slide. Next one.
Hang on, Kurt, having technical here.
That's fine. I think some of the next slides, well, with this one and even the one right before it, just kind of illustrates kind of the kind of pedestrian kind of sidewalk environments that we have, where we see them really more than just simply getting from point A to point B, but there will be lighting with banners, benches, furnishings. So really creating, I think, a very kind of exciting pedestrian flow throughout the project. Next slide. And lastly, and I think just as important, I just wanted to touch on the kind of the urban canopy that we're going to be planting. So we're going to be planting over 500 new trees as part of this project, as well as a significant amount of understory. What we see is kind of reintroducing this kind of urban forest to what, you know, originally was there pre-development, and the way that we can tie this to the national resource area to the east to really create this kind of habitat corridor throughout the site, and really using native plants, wherever we can. And as part of that, the stormwater facilities that we'll be designing will take care of the stormwater runoff. Certainly we see opportunities for art and also education as we develop those. I think now I'll turn it over to Brad just to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Kurt. Oh. Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, everybody. My name is Brad Kilby, and I'm just going to speak quickly about utilities. As you already know, it is a challenging site. Luckily, we're in a downtown core, and sewer and water are already available on multiple frontages. So sewer and water will be extended into the site from existing sewer and water facilities that are located in Abernathy Road, Washington Street, and the street that runs next to Home Depot. Stormwater is a little bit more complicated. We cannot compromise the clay cap over the former landfill. Since infiltration is not possible then, we'll have to treat all our private stormwater on site entirely. And we propose to do that through a combination of mechanical treatment systems in some of the parking areas and low impact development alternatives such as vegetative swales, and working with Kurt to make some of these areas function also as stormwater treatment areas. Franchise utilities will all be placed underground, new franchise utilities that are located and brought into the site for the residences and the businesses will all be placed underground. There are going to be 6 new access locations. One is at the existing Home Depot. That road will be extended in through the site to form what Greg called the Market Street, and will connect to Abernathy Road. So that runs all the way through the site. Then there will be 2 additional accesses into the parking garages along Washington Street. And then next to the building that is furthest south and west, there will be another driveway that comes in and serves the development. In addition, there will be 2 new accesses along Abernathy Road. One will be past the intersection of Abernathy and Redland, and then the other one will be as far west and run along between the 2 properties of this site and the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. Another complicating factor with developing on a landfill site is all of our grading is really limited by the height of that clay cap. So we can't dig into that, but there'll be a lot of moving of dirt on site, but it will be very shallow, and then it will be moved around on site. So grading will occur and is designed to be balanced entirely all on site. Earthwork activities within the project will be supervised by the project civil engineer, who's Dan Loss from our office, and overseen by geotechnical engineers at ND5, which is formerly Geodesign, and Aronson Environmental. Both of those firms have a long history of working on the site and within the area. So they know what they're going to run up against, especially particular to this site, and they can guide the development and future development of individual parcels within that area. So with that, Eric Aronson from Aronson Environmental will provide an overview of the site and the proposed benefits of the development from the perspective of redeveloping a brownfield. Thank you.
Hello. Hey, just get my video on, I guess. Right on. There we go. So anyways, as John mentioned in the intro, I've been working on Rossman's landfill for almost 20 years now. And that means I've seen a lot of developers go through their screening process, including working closely with DEQ and their consultants on the proposed Rivers project that Kent mentioned earlier. What excites me right now about working with the Summit on this project is, in addition to the proposed development, it's really been a collaborative and proactive approach. We've been engaged with DEQ, working through the process, And we've also been able to take a lot advantage of the lessons that have been learned from the Home Depot project, the Discount Tire project, Center Cal projects, and some of the other smaller starts that didn't even move very far. For DEQ to be on board, obviously, they have to recognize that there's a real public benefit to doing this. But ultimately, they are also going to be doing oversight on the environmental monitoring management, looking at aspects of the design, commenting on that, looking at maintaining the landfill cover. So they are very much been engaged, been very active, and been very positive about this process. So for my presentation, I'm going to go discuss the construction challenges and the environmental benefits that are associated with developing this brownfield site. And to start with, to put that in a context, I'll start with some of the background on the project. So, here's some general facts about the landfill to begin with. It was operated from 1969 to 1983, and they received approximately 60% of the waste from the Portland metro area. Is obviously a very important feature, served a very important focus. It took over 3 million tons of waste, and it covers approximately 85 acres to a depth of 45 feet. So this is a very significant size brownfield site. Their property is currently owned by Park Place Development. It's a small family-owned company with limited financial resources. There have been numerous environmental investigations conducted, always under DEQ oversight. So beginning during the 1980s, they conducted many groundwater investigations, going through the regulations changed. In 1992, they conducted, and I'm just going to point out the major ones, but a closure feasibility study. That was a study that actually selects what the best remedy is after looking at all the potential options for how you could go about closing the site in a economically, actually just even a practical or pragmatic way to do it. Some other investigations have been conducted over the years. 2009, we did a landfill gas investigation. And in 2017, we actually did a focused feasibility study. What that means is we literally went kind of back all the way, looked at all the environmental monitoring data, the data that we continue to collect on the site, and compared it to current standards, the current regulatory values, to assess that they're the current status of the landfill. So in addition to that, there's also been environmental investigations that had to do with, for example, the Center Cal Rivers development. These environmental costs were initially funded by a trust fund. So the company that operated the landfill set aside funds under DEQ oversight, but those funds were exhausted in 2001. That fund was administered by Clackamas County. And subsequent to that, there's been approximately $2 million spent to just keep track of and keep up with the responsibilities for managing the site. Next slide, please. So this slide, just high-level slide talking about brownfield sites, obviously, and the challenges that come with the brownfield sites. So text is a little bit off on this, but ultimately the point of this is that this project has to pencil out in the end. And so you have a column on the left that is increased costs. You have a column in the middle that are new costs. Those are going to be costs that are pretty much exclusive to developing at a brownfield site. And the offset is essentially, what somehow makes this actually work. And usually that's a significantly discounted land price and a public subsidy. Next slide, please. Here's just an example of, this is Astoria landfill. This is actually a brownfield site that was developed into the Astoria Athletic Complex. That's a pretty interesting project in and of itself because it took a collaboration of 4 different groups to be able to pull that off. By my count, there's 9 landfill sites that have been redeveloped in Oregon. Usually takes a major driver to make that work. A couple other examples would be the H.G. Lavelle landfill in Portland, which is now Asian American Plaza and the Durham Marine Center. A big example would be Bridgeport Village which was a Center Cal development that was built on the Durham Pit landfill. And then, of course, there's many, many other brownfield sites that have been redeveloped that are non-landfills, such as the South Waterfront. Next slide, please. So, ultimately, this slide lists some of the major aspects of issues that are going on the site. There's a little figure showing the topography of the site. That topography on the site ultimately needs to be maintained or worked with to the extent because you need to maintain the cap because we have potential for ongoing settling. And that also means that you're gonna have specialized foundation systems. And these are all some of these additional costs that go into developing a brownfield site, particularly for a landfill site. With regard to specialized foundations, there's a schematic on the far right side of this. That is actually the Home Depot building. And what each one of those small gray squares is, those represent the 1,700 pilings that were driven down to about 45 feet to bedrock or to a stable rock formation in order to support those slabs. So this, ultimately the building's built on a large slab. That slab extends beyond the perimeter of the building so that it's supports the sidewalks and the adjacent driveways. But it's certainly not a trivial undertaking. And then a couple other things, obviously, that have been touched on earlier, things like building protection systems and subsurface extraction and monitoring. There's also a schematic in there real quick, sort of just to the right of building protection systems, or those words. Looking at the network of monitoring and gas extraction that goes along with the Home Depot building. Because ultimately these buildings will require removing basically the potential for any kind of gas to come up to the surface. That's done by either passively or actively venting beneath that. And so various well-established technology. Next slide, please. So ultimately, in a big reason why DEQ is very supportive of it is this has the potential to, and someone has agreed to, establish a trust fund that will cover the next 30 years of the ongoing environmental compliance and remediation work that's covered under the permit. So when I say permit, it means all the kind of stuff that they have to do right now through a closure permit with DEQ to consistently monitor, operate our remediation systems across the site and take care of things. That will be funded upfront with the idea that it will then be managed over the next 30 years. 30 years being a very conservative estimate of how long that could possibly be needed. Some of the other benefits, some it's also going to be, paying for some very significant improvements that will protect and add to the environmental benefits of the site. Those are engineering and controls and remediation systems, such as the landfill gas management and monitoring system that we just mentioned that will protect the buildings, but also prevent any off-site migration of landfill gas. One of the remediation systems we do currently operate is addresses off-site remediation, off-site migration of landfill gas. Ultimately, it is by developing this site, asphalt, concrete, buildings, etc., are ultimately a major improvement to the landfill cover. Now that prevents the infiltration of precipitation, stormwater, etc., so that it does not leach or reach down into the waste and leach, create leachate or basically pick up potential contaminants from the waste underneath. They've also thought very well ahead on the fact that stormwater is going to be treated on site and discharged off property, such that you're now again reducing the potential amount of water that's going to be passing through or available to create leachate. There's also commitments that are legally binding in all the documents we've worked out with DEQ, such that the summit will be conducting additional monitoring to assess the landfill gas emissions, assess landfill gas migration and groundwater quality during construction. And we have actually gone through the process with DEQ to the point where we already have been out for public comment. The documents are basically stable, approved by all parties. It was over a year of negotiation and working through that process to make sure that everything was covered and everybody had the level of comfort they needed, that issues would be addressed and appropriately funded. So that's the end of what I was going to talk about. In addition to the questions I anticipate regarding environmental considerations for the site, there's probably a lot of interest as well in the transportation design, which Phil Worth of Kittleson will now address. Take it away, Phil.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. Wait for my camera to come back on here. And like Eric, I've had a long history in this area, quite a bit of planning. It really started in the late 90s when I was working with Oregon City on its Oregon City Regional Center planning project. Shortly after that, Oregon City's long-range transportation plan. That was done in the late 90s and looked to the year 2020. And here we are in 2021. And then there we go. What you see on the slide right now are two pictures, one on the left before 2011, and then the picture on the right, which was after 2013, and is still pretty representative of what we see in this area of the community today from a transportation infrastructure perspective. So back to kind of that historical perspective, the Regional Center project, the Oregon City Transportation System Plan, and then other plans have all anticipated the development of this site and anticipated it along the exact lines that are being proposed now. That sense of consistency runs concurrent with your comprehensive plan and with the zoning. So this strong sense of community planning for this to happen sometime in the future, and maybe that future is about to be realized. I wanted to start with this picture or set of pictures to really highlight an improvement that did happen back in 2012, 2013 that we're all enjoying the fruits of. And it was locally affectionately referred to as the Jug Handle Project. What it did was to convert the way Highway 213 had its interchange with I-205, how it crossed over the railroad tracks there, and it introduced an undercrossing of 213 that became the connection of Washington Street to Clackamas River Drive. And it changed the way that Clackamas River Drive and Washington Street came and connected to Highway 213. And all of those improvements were made, again, in anticipation of this site and this whole area of Oregon City, including the Cove, being developed. More specifically to the next slide, Greg, what you've had a chance to hear from Greg and from Kurt are plans for what would be done on the site. I'm just going to reiterate a few of those things because it's all focused on transportation now, which was my area of expertise that I brought to the team. So what you see here is the site plan and a few features that I really want to just talk through quickly. First, the blue line. That blue line represents a new collector street that's to be built connecting Washington Street to Abernathy Road. That's a requirement that comes out of the city's transportation system plan. So the developer is required to construct that street. And as Greg illustrated earlier, that street is going to look and feel much like a collector. It will have sidewalks, it'll have a planter strip, it's going to have on-street parking, it'll have on-street striped bike lanes, and then travel lanes for motor vehicles. So a substantive facility that will go all the way through the site connecting Washington Street to Abernathy. You see two green lines. Each of those green lines represents what's called a shared use path. Both of those pathways are required, again, by the city's transportation system plan. So they must be built as this site develops out. You see a yellow line that runs parallel to Abernathy Road. Again, that's a requirement of the city's transportation system plan. It's referred to as a multi-use pathway. And what it's meant to do is to provide pedestrian and bicycle facilities that are separated completely from the vehicle lanes or from Abernathy Road proper. And then the last pair of lines that you see on the diagram here are the red lines on Washington Street and Abernathy Road. Again, the developer will be required to improve both of those streets for the entire length of the frontage to the current city's standards. And so there'll be travel lanes in each direction. There'll be the center two-way left turn lane that we see today on both roadways. You'll see on-street parking in some areas. You'll see striped bike lanes along the entire frontage. Then you'll also see that planter strip, and then finally the sidewalk. So all of those improvements will be constructed. Lastly, on the diagram, you see a few more things. The yellow circle is really meant to highlight this pedestrian and bicycle connection that will be created from the site down to the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. And lastly, those 5 stars that you see really are just identifying what are the key multimodal connections from the street system into and around the site. All of this infrastructure that you're looking at would normally be dedicated as public right-of-way and become the ownership of the public once the project was done. But in this case, that won't happen. In fact, it will be built, all of these facilities will be built to city standards on the site, but ownership of them will be retained by the developer. And so all of the obligations to maintain and operate these facilities will not go to the city, but will remain the obligation of the owner developer of the site. So an important thing to keep in mind. Next slide, please. What I'm really trying to summarize here for you is what has the developer been required to do to ensure that the transportation system is or can be made to be adequate to accommodate all of this growth and change that's anticipated. And so what my job was to sit down with city staff, county staff, and Oregon Department of Transportation staff and discuss with them what's the scope of the transportation impact study that had to be done to support the application for the development of this site. So we worked through that scope, and the short version of the story is that the agency said, we need you to study 3 time periods: the typical weekday morning commute period, the typical weekday evening peak period, and then the Saturday midday peak period, when a lot of shopping activity occurs in the Oregon City community. So we studied those 3 time periods before the development is completed, and then when the development is fully built and fully occupied. And the next question that we had to figure out was, what intersections are we going to study? And the next 2 pictures really show you that. So Greg, this slide is a map from Oregon City's Transportation System Plan. And each of those dots is a study intersection in Oregon City's Transportation System Plan. And roughly 25 to 30 intersections were studied for your city's comprehensive transportation plan. The next slide shows you the 25 intersections that we were required to study for those 3 different time periods without and then with the development. And you can see every one of those blue dots is a location where we had to collect traffic counts and do our analysis. This study has been done. The findings have been delivered to the city. City staff are currently reviewing it, and we're looking forward to discussions about those findings and set of recommendations that come from the work. Ultimately, the city will obligate the development through conditions of approval to make improvements wherever they're identified as being needed. And those improvements will be phased in conjunction with phases of development on the site, so that in the end, what the city and the community have is the assurance that the infrastructure, the transportation facilities will be in place to accommodate the demand that's coming. So you get the infrastructure before you get the development is kind of the result of this transportation impact analysis that was done. So that's a quick description of the work that we've done. And again, it's in the hands of the city right now for their review. And with that, I'll end my part of the presentation and hand it back over to Seth Henderson.
Thanks, Phil. So that wraps up the presentation for today. There's some links that you can see currently. Should you want to explore some additional information regarding this project, it looks like we've got some polls popping up right now, but we'd like to move quickly into Q&A. We ran a little bit longer than we wanted on the presentation, but there's a substantial amount of information and obviously effort that's gone into that information. And we wanted to make sure that we were being fully transparent. And this is where we sit. Here's what we've done to date. And so I will now pass it to OCBA to moderate the Q&A portion here.
Wonderful. We do have some questions. One is, some have said that this development of the Rossman landfill is too complicated for Oregon City to engage in. How would you respond to that?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Some have said the development of the Rossman landfill is too complicated for Oregon City to engage in. How would you respond to that?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure in what manner they're saying it's too complicated. What we are proposing has been done elsewhere. There is nothing that we're proposing that has not previously been executed in a development of this scale. If you look at the experience of the project team members that we've put together, I'm confident that we have the ability to execute on this development at this particular site. I would probably turn it over to Eric if you have anything else to add there in terms of environmental.
I think with regards to the environmental complexities, obviously we already have the Home Depot and the Discount Tire, which are really great examples of successful development on this property. The ability to do that without creating any additional environmental impacts and actually add some benefits. Ultimately, the Home Depot is that parcel is actually funding the environmental compliance through 2026, at which point that trust fund we mentioned from Summit would actually pick up. So yeah, I guess I'm not 100% clear on the complexity concerns.
Yeah.
Great. What ADA accommodation will there be for the vertical park, and how will you deal with perennial skateboard problems?
Well, that's a great question. And you know, always with skateboarding and issues associated with that, it's always best to think about that up front rather than having it being a remedy afterwards. So not only with the vertical park, but really also the connections to the Oregon Trail, Interpretive Center will all be ADA compliant. So what we'd like to do is as best we can to make those slopes shallow enough where we don't have to have a lot of railings, which also encourage skateboarders. And then also just by having a meandering kind of switchback, I think also helps mitigate that as well. But all the pathways will be ADA compliant.
Great. Looking forward to the future, will there be ways to accommodate electrical vehicles like multiple charging stations and alternative power projects like solar panels, etc.?
Yeah, so on our Block 3 project that we're doing up in Vancouver waterfront, I believe we're putting in 5% charging stations of the overall stall count and capacity for 20% of the overall stall count. I would actually argue that based on the news that's coming out of automobile manufacturers, that may be light. So we'll do, again, right now we're in the general development plan. So it's the overall framework. I've actually been a lead AP, if you know what that is, since I think it's 2007 now. So going on 14 years. I am a huge proponent of sustainability. And not only are the electrical vehicle charging stations, not only does it make market sense just based on where the market's going to, but obviously from sustainability, it's the right way to go. As it relates to, and I was actually going to look up his name, as it relates to whether we would do alternative power generation or more importantly, potentially storage on this site. I used to play soccer with the individual who is now the commercial real estate market manager for PGE. So they brought him in from the Port of Portland specifically to support large scale private development projects. And I probably talked to him 2 years ago about working together on a significant project. And it was always, hey, when you bring something big enough for us to be interested, let's look at all the possible options. And this size project, this scale, this location is perfect for that dialogue. So I reached out to him about 2 months ago and he was on sabbatical. But as soon as he gets back, we will be diving into how can we partner with PGE up front to make sure that from electrical utility standpoint, that this project is as sustainable as possible.
So one last question, given we're running a little short on time. Anchor stores like Sears, Penny's, Meijer, Frank, et cetera, have been failing in favor of online shopping, especially during the pandemic. How does your plan propose to attract on-site shoppers to these stores you're proposing?
There's a few ways to answer that. So one is to start with looking at a mixed use project. So if you look at most of the locations where those large anchors are failing, a lot of them are malls, right? They are retail only specific developments. So part of what we're trying to do here, not only because it's written into the zoning code for mixed use downtown, but also because it gives stabilization economically, is you diversify the uses on site. So you've got multifamily, you're essentially bringing the shoppers directly to the shops to some degree, right? You're going to have entertainment. We're looking at both national brands as well as boutique brands, large scale, small scale. So you try to diversify the uses and what you're offering. That's one. The other one is you're going for the type of brands and the type of uses that currently do not exist and that people will come to the site for. So I don't think I saw her name, but Liz Hannum, who is the executive director of the Downtown Oregon City Association, kudos to her. She reached out to us. And I've had a couple of discussions with her regarding what businesses are currently downtown. What is it that she thinks we can build on our site that will not compete with, but will help augment the downtown? How do we physically connect those two? She actually sent me a roster of all the businesses and kind of the different sectors they fall into, so we could look at it together and say, here's the uses that you guys should be proposing for your site. Here's where we currently have omissions in certain business types in the downtown. And I actually set up with her a reoccurring monthly discussion. So we will continue to discuss, how that's something we are very sensitive to. And it was also a great question that was asked during the CIC, which is, how do you differentiate your site, which is zoned for mixed use downtown, from the existing downtown so they don't cannibalize one another? And that will be a constant discussion that we have with the overall business community in Oregon City.
Well, fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your thorough answers. With that, we have quite a few more questions, but we're running short, so I will return the mic over to our illustrious president.
Well, thank you, Renata. Thank you, Seth, and thank you to all the other team members for the Summit Development Group. I was taking a lot of notes during the PowerPoint presentation and the various slides. It's very obvious that not only have you been investing time, money, and resources during this year and a half that you've been involved with the project thus far, but just really looking at what has worked elsewhere, what successful projects can we learn from where they've had to deal with a landfill and other type of physical impairments. But the fact that you're focusing on the live, work, play with close to 500 multifamily units to provide additional housing, I think is such a key component to the vibrancy of a mixed-use project such as this. And one of the things that you mentioned was community benefit. And I've been involved with the Willamette Falls Trust, which is the redevelopment of the Blue Heron site and the Riverwalk. And if you look at downtown Oregon City and you use the Blue Heron as one bookend and you use the gateway to the North End district, focusing on the Rossman landfill as the hub, and then all the other uses around it, what an amazing opportunity Oregon City would have to be able to connect and engage not only people from our region, but just our local community to be able to have a holistic experience of environmental sustainability, historical characterization and recognition, but also an economic generator of employment opportunities unmatched in Oregon City as far as I've known. And I grew up in Oregon City and have lived my whole life in Clackamas County. So kudos to all of you. I know that this is not an easy project. That's why it's been 10 years since CenterCal looked at it with Cabela's, and they eventually went to Tualatin, which was unfortunate because that would have been a real positive amenity and attribute for Oregon City, but we can't change that. But what we can do is try to help and support you in any way we can. I know you've got some meetings coming up with various groups on different ways of financing this project through a public-private partnership. And we at the Oregon City Business Alliance just want to let each and every one of you know that we support you 100%. We are here for you. We believe high tide raises all ships and activity generates additional activity. So if the Rossman landfill site could be developed into the vision that you've shared with us today, I think the whole city and community will benefit from it. So again, many, many thanks for the time and effort you put into this today. With that being said, next month, we're going to switch gears now and move on to the homelessness situation that we've been facing throughout the entire region. Fortunately, we have 2 Metro bond measures that have been approved for affordable housing, as well as the Here Together program to provide services for those that might have mental or emotional disorders or issues that goes along with tent cities. So we ask that you look for the invitation. It'll be a panel discussion again, just like today. Jim Band, the police chief for Oregon City, will be one of our lead speakers, plus probably about a half a dozen other individuals that are involved in various facets of the homeless situation in our local community. So again, we're always on the 4th Tuesday of the month, so just be looking for that invitation. Unfortunately, I have some bad news. The governor has raised Clackamas County to the higher risk category. So if you were planning on going out to eat, you want to do it this week, because that'll go into effect on Friday, that all indoor dining will close again. But who knows, one of these days we'll have this project with a lot of new restaurants to choose from for indoor dining. With that being said, we appreciate everybody, their time today, and we will see you next month. Thank you for attending.